Hi, I'm Kattina Anglin, and this is a good show. Thank you so much for being here with me on this episode of A Good Show. This episode is a very special edition because I'm going to actually read to you from a speech that I have written. I have taken the time to prepare this in light of my judgment that has been handed down, which the whole world knows by now that the Privy Council handed down in my mother, Kattina Anglin, and the governor of the Cayman Islands on the 30th of June. But before addressing the judgment, I wish to address a couple of factually incorrect public statements that evidence two things. One, people for the most part fail or refuse to research on topics or people they oppose. And two, they accept and promote the narrative that makes them feel good. The first thing is that my mother was a waste of public funds. My mother was a constitutional matter on which no case law existed throughout any of the British overseas territories. Obtaining the judgment now clarifies for the Cayman Islands, for our House of Parliament, for other British overseas territories, and the people of the Cayman Islands, the power that the governor has. The second point is that I only pay attention to the LGBT. Nothing could be further from the truth. For those of you who are unaware of my advocacy in this Cayman Islands and choose to follow the blind, kindly note the following. My first legal challenge was at the age of 15 years old, when, as a teenage mother, I fought the government for my right to an education after giving birth to my son. I won that fight and was the first teenage mother allowed to return to school, opening the way for other young women to return to school and complete their education on which they could obtain meaningful employment and maintain their child and themselves. In less than a year after taking up employment at the cruise terminal, I spearheaded the challenge to balance the playing field for local tour operators who did not have pre-booked contracts with the FCCA. This resulted in Mr. McKeever Bush, who became the Minister of Tourism, forming the Cayman Land and Sea Cooperative, through which contracts for pre-booked tours for cooperative members were negotiated and secured, thereby increasing the economic opportunities for local operators. When the government sought to release the genetically modified mosquitoes in West Bay, I championed that cause, along with Mr. Dwayne Banks, who became the petitioner against the government. Although that matter was not appealed, the people had an opportunity to have their concerns heard in court. I led the campaign against the vaccine mandates for work permit holders, PR holders, and Caymanians alike to have their freedom of choice whether to be vaccinated. On the Citizens Initiative radio show on Radio Cayman, I have advocated for, among other things, road safety and our duty for care for other road users, domestic violence against men, the rights of the disabled, sexual abuse of children using my own horrible experience of years of sexual abuse, guidance for those dealing with drug addiction, both for the addict and for their loved ones. Since starting our TV broadcast show, A Good Show, I have, sometimes at Pastor Ellen Peguero, other times alone, sometimes as a monologue, and other times with guests, advocated for or hosted segments on better working conditions for domestic helpers and construction workers in particular, but for all employees in a segment called Modern Day Slavery in the Cayman Islands. I've advocated for the plight of prisoners and prisoners' rights. We did a segment called Self-Love, Overcoming Sexual Abuse. NAU and the plight of family members who have dependents on NAU. A series on marriage, immigration, and employment. Investigative reports on the COVID vaccination program and whether that was an effective, safe program. The cruise pair, parentage, arresting imprisonment, crime prevention series. Hope, jealousy, feminism, masculinity, and chauvinism. I'm sure you get the point. These broadcasts, of course, do not include the public speaking presentations I have done, including at seminars for women empowerment and elevation. Those who do not know me do not know the amount of advocacy I have done to help us all live in a safer, healthier environment. What they know is what they have chosen to know for the purpose that they have chosen it for, to unjustly criticize me. My third point is that despite the disinformation that has unfortunately been promulgated around the world, the Civil Partnership Act, or the CPA, is not same-sex legislation. It is not. Heterosexuals and gays alike can engage in a civil partnership, and those of us who choose to remember will recall that a selling point by the proponents of the CPA, including the governor of the day, Mr. Martin Roper, was that heterosexuals would also be able to engage in civil partnerships as well. That point won over support from some of those opposing the legislation in its early stages. I'll repeat it again for clarity, that the CPA is legislation for both heterosexual and gay couples alike, and should not be referred to as same-sex legislation, which is offensive to the heterosexuals who are licensed under the CPA. And turning to the judgment, there are three main points to be taken from the judgment. My challenge was not, nor ever has been, about same-sex legislation. 2, the governor has the power to use Section 81 of our Constitution for the purpose of passing legislation as might be deemed an international obligation. And 3, the Cayman Islands House of Parliament is not sovereign. On the first point, my challenge to the governor's actions was not in relation to the name of the legislation he passed, the Civil Partnership Act, but the legality of him using Section 81 of the Constitution to access Section 55 of the Cayman Islands Constitution. And for your reassurance, I refer you to paragraph 31 of the Privy Council's judgment, which reads, and I quote, "The present proceedings do not seek to challenge the governor's judgment that the enactment of the CPA was necessary or desirable. Rather, the appellate maintains that this does not fall within the governor's responsibility to act with respect to external affairs. What is meant by external affairs in Section 55 is a question of construction of the Constitution and therefore a question of law." The nature of my challenge was lost on many because of the subject matter of the legislation, instead of the methodology used to accommodate the passage of the legislation. In all the pleadings and even judgments, it was made abundantly clear that my challenge was not focused on whether the legislation was about any particular legislation or any particular subject, as the Privy Council, the Court of Appeal, and the Grand Court pointed out. Yet, my antagonists chose to make this presentation in each of their publications. Not only was this disinformation, but it was also reckless and an affront to the very constitutional principles I fought to protect, taking the correct approach. Many of you will understand and appreciate that I was bound by the convention of subjudice and was limited on how much I could speak publicly on my matter. But that did not stop others from engaging publicly on the possibility that a political usurpation had actually occurred, or to hold debates on constitutionality. Not a single LGBT proponent chose to discuss the issue of potential illegality openly and honestly Instead, the matter was used to try to defame me and label me with names that I was not given at birth. Fortunately for me, I know my name. My case was never about same-sex legislation. It was always about the legality of the governor's actions, and it should be known to all, Christians and non-Christians alike, that had this act been enforced and the governor chose to have the legislation repealed, utilizing an avenue that I believe was unconstitutional, I would have still challenged him all the way to the Privy Council. I fought this case the way that I have fought other challenges in my life, including drug addiction, and even the way that I fight for my clients' cases, because I believe that I must stay in the fight until the very end. Giving up is not an option. Success is the only thing. Completion, victory is the only option that I have. And so I remain in the fight until the very end, because it's not over until it gets to the end. And I just will take the time to interject right now for those of you who are wondering if this is the end. It may or it may not be the end of my matter, because I am awaiting advice from my legal team on whether or not you should approach the ECHR. On points 2 and 3, I have already been approached by some members of our financial industry regarding the possibility of the governor imposing legislation under the premise of international obligations. International law is currently clear on the international obligations regarding terrorist funding and money laundering. And whilst it is acknowledged that there must be conference and conversation with the Premier, a governor who is constitutionally permitted to can pass legislation despite the will of the people and the views of their elected representatives. And once it is confirmed that cabinet nor our elected legislator will pass the legislation because we, the electorate, and the elected do not believe it is in the best interest of the Cayman Islands, the governor, the Secretary of State's approval, can pass that legislation. The Council's recognition that the Cayman Islands lack parliamentary sovereignty is not just a Cayman Islands issue, but a regional issue for all British overseas territories whose constitutions allow the governor to make or amend laws except Bermuda, Montserrat, and St. Helena, whose constitutions do not allow the governor to make law. Considering that there are territories and constitutions that do not allow governors to make law, the territories should consider how we want to be ruled and by whom, and the constitutional reform that is necessary to achieve greater autonomy for the territories who have provisions that enable the governor to make legislation. Well, whilst there are undeniable benefits to being a British overseas territory, there's also the undeniable truth that London has fallen to radical Islamism, to woke ideology, and the Brits who fought from time immemorial for the supremacy of Britain are now second-class citizens who cannot speak up for their ancestral British heritage and culture. Britain is now a country rife with anti-Semitism and lawlessness, where entertainers shout from their stage for the death of an entire army, and by extension, an entire race. And they do so without reprise. It is a nation that in less than 7 days voted to kill its youngest and eldest human beings. It is a country where its own people are flocking here to the Cayman Islands because we are safer than cities and small towns in England and throughout the UK. It is a nation whose leaders are more interested in sexuality than national security. The Cayman Islands, along with other territories, must ask themselves, who do we want to be ruled by and how? Britain just recently won its own anti-colonialism fight when it fought and won to leave the EU. That fight was called Brexit. The reason they left the European Union was because laws were being made that England did not agree with and were not in England's best interests. The territories, having the experience that we now have in governance, must consider whether we want to be ruled by a nation that has lost control of its capital and who left the EU because of laws that were passed by other European nations, but believes it should be allowed to impose legislation on us. We are in an age when historical British colonialism is frowned upon, and if we accept that our forefathers' colonial reign should have ended, then it must be our conclusion that our societies have no place or tolerance for neo-colonialism. While I am not advocating for independence, I am advocating for the educational discussions and the consultations between the UK and the territories to be had, not just at a leadership level, but consultations with the people of each territory for their education and participation in the democratic process. It must be appreciated that this would be a process that would last for years, but would lead to greater autonomy incrementally and a constitutional arrangement within each territory in which the governor has no legislative power. Each territory having a duly elected parliament, we, the British Overseas Territories, must ask ourselves, who do we want to be ruled by and how? This is Kattina Anglin, and thank you for joining me for this episode of A Good Show. You can watch A Good Show every Sunday and Wednesday at 7 p.m. on Cayman Life TV, Channel 33 on Logic. You may also find us on YouTube, and please visit our pages at the Christian Association on Facebook and YouTube, and now even on Instagram. Thank you, and God bless you.